welcome to our Summer of Cyber Education today we have great friend and a great mind in the cybersecurity world, Gerald Auger, and he's going to be discussing GRC, day in the life of a GRC person. As you guys know, I've been doing GRC since before it was called GRC, so this is going to be a wonderful talk, and I think it's going to give you guys a lot of good information. Again, thank you very much for being here on Raices Cyber, and without further ado, Gerald, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for this opportunity, y'all, to get together and share some information, maybe pull back the curtain a little bit on what GRC is, maybe help you find your own passion in it, or maybe realize that you're already doing GRC work and you just didn't realize it. There are some slides. Eric's controlling them. It's not really a kind of death by PowerPoint type talk. And I do want to advise everybody, I don't know what the conventions are for Discord, but I would love to answer any questions you have. I typically start getting spicy and start ripping off on a tear. So if you have questions, just let me know or let someone know, and we can, I want this to be collaborative. I want this to have value for you. And that's my goal. So, okay. So GRC Day in the Life. The purpose of this talk is really to explore the different fundamental areas of GRC that an analyst would work in, and explain a little bit about like what the work is, what's good about it, what stinks about it, and maybe what skills you would want. And the idea is that it's not necessarily a day in the life as much as it's like kind of the lifestyle of a GRC analyst and what that feels like and looks like and et cetera. So just to ground this, Eric, thank you. Just to ground this, who am I and like why do I know a thing or two about GRC? So my name is Gerald Auger. I have a PhD in cyber operations, which is much more focused on the technical side of the house, but I am a true student of cybersecurity and just absolutely passionate about it. So, anything I can get, I absolutely consume. I have worked in the industry for over 17 years, with the bulk of it being in the GRC capacity. So I came up kind of entry-level GRC all the way to building and managing my own information security programs in a CISO capability. I've worked across multiple industries, so manufacturing, healthcare, federal IT. I did a brief moment in financial services, which was not my speed, so I didn't want to hang out there very long. I do run a YouTube channel called Simply Cyber, which is maybe you're familiar with it, but basically it's a community, not unlike Cyber Raices, of inclusive, supportive groups of cybersecurity professionals or people wanting to work in cybersecurity that they can, get information, get knowledge, network, etc. So if you haven't heard of it, please, I encourage you to go check it out. That's the website, but there's like a YouTube and a Discord and all that stuff. And the final thing I'll say, and this becomes important whether you decide to go to GRC or you're blue or red, or it doesn't matter. If you want to work in the industry or you already do and you're not staying up to date daily with current news and activities and goings on, really what are threat actors doing and how are they changing? I do a daily cyber threat briefing every weekday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern. It is recorded, but the live is pretty popular. So if you go to simplycyber.io/streams, it's right there on the slide. You'll get dropped into like all the upcoming broadcasts. It's wicked fun in the morning. So I'd encourage you to check it out. All right, so let's go.
And Gerald, yeah, your Friday stream is also really good. So talk about that one.
Yeah, okay. So this is like a new stream. So I have a couple different shows under the Simply Cyber brand. The morning threat briefings. I also do a Thursday evening, like 4:30 to 5:30, expert guest interview, kind of a 1-hour format. And on Fridays at 4 o'clock, I have a show called What's on Your Radar. And that's actually including me, three senior cybersecurity professionals they rotate, right? So Eric was actually one of the panelists a couple weeks ago. It rotates, and the idea is you get to talk, or these three industry professionals talk about something that's on their radar right now. And the benefit is if you're new to the industry, or you're still kind of in your early part of your career, you can see what senior practitioners, what's catching their eye, why is it catching their eye, what are the bigger implications of these particular topics. For example, yesterday, my radar item was this new technology called Deep Insight that claims to offer 100% prevention from ransomware, which I found absurd. So I dug into that and presented that to the audience. So if you're interested in that, again, if you go to simplycyber.io/streams, that basically just drops you into my upcoming live streams on my YouTube channel. So you can see all of those things. And since I'm pitching all these things, I'll just tell you another thing. If you are interested in GRC, which I guess you would be because you're here today, on Wednesdays at 11:30, I love streaming. So on Wednesdays at 11:30, I actually play a game called ThreatGen Red versus Blue. It's a cybersecurity simulation platform, but every other week, you can be the blue team or the red team. Every other week, I play blue, and I actually explain live during the stream my methodology as a CISO on how I'm making decisions, weighing things, how I'm like when I'm going to the board to get money, why I'd get money, how I would make the argument to get the money. It's really, I find it interesting just to see kind of how the mind works in an actual kind of accelerated fashion of building an information security program in an hour. And I do that every Wednesday if you're into that. So, but that's not on, well, I guess I do broadcast it on Simply Cyber. It comes from ThreatGen's channel, but I pair it with my Simply Cyber. Thank you. So I know that was a lot of information, but let's talk about GRC. So GRC at the macro level, you need to understand, it stands for governance, risk, and compliance, which many people know, but the main implicit function of the GRC component of an information security program is to interface with the business. So what does that mean? Well, if you look at kind of the other functions within an information security program, you'll see that they're not interfacing with the business, right? So you've got your SOC analyst. Yes, Carl falls for a fish and a SOC analyst calls Carl on the phone. So you are interacting with the end users, but not necessarily the business. The SOC analysts are looking at their, eye candy displays, they're going through logs, all that stuff. They're tuning SIMs. They're doing technical stuff. Your identity and access management people, they're working through workflows and operational processes. When the business needs to understand what are we doing about information security, or we heard about a major issue like a Colonial Pipeline. What are we doing, right? That always interfaces through the GRC office, and the CISO, the leader of the information security program, typically comes from the GRC tree, if you will. It's not unheard of for red teamers to become CISOs and blue teamers and stuff. But for the most part, that GRC career path lends itself because they've been talking to the business the whole time. Additionally, and we'll get into this in more detail when I talk about risk, but because the GRC function interfaces with the business, listen, the business doesn't know anything about information security, right? They just know that we're here to make a product or deliver some value to a customer base who are in return going to give us revenue or money, right? It's a business. That's how very simply businesses work, right? So when there is an issue or concern or, some type of risk that's being presented, like ransomware, business email compromise, the Ukraine war and the surge of, CISO warnings for shields up, all this stuff, it's incumbent on GRC people to do the risk analysis, right? And a risk analysis is a little bit more, I would say, like mid-tier or higher in your career path, but to do that risk analysis and then advise the business, hey, listen, this, we've looked at our program. We have looked at the threat model of what ransomware attack would do to us, and we are at high risk. we don't have multi-factor authentication, so initial attack vector could, it's a higher probability of compromise. And then our backups, we do them, but we never test them, so we have no confidence in how well we'd be able to recover. We can't tell you how long it would take. Some businesses can't go down for 7 days, right? Imagine a business goes down for 7 days, and it's like Netflix, right? If Netflix went down for 7 days, people would be flipping out, probably canceling, because now Netflix has all this other competition with Disney Plus and stuff. So long story short, this is GRC's function, right? Here's the problem. Now it's going to cost X amount of money and take this much time to implement like the Cadillac solution that's going to bring us way down to low risk. Here's another option. We can do it faster, costs the same amount of money. Here's another option. It's cheaper, takes less time. It's more of a Band-Aid than it is like an actual fix, but it'll at least it'll get us to the end of the fiscal year when we can actually request more money, etc. All of this is interfacing with the business, and all of this is what GRC does, right? So now let's go down one level deeper and actually talk about the core functions themselves, right? The actual tactical transactional work of the different areas of GRC. So the very first area I have is audit and compliance, and I chose to put that first intentionally. Audit and compliance is a fantastic way to break in to cybersecurity, or if you're going to pivot into cybersecurity from like an IT role or from any role, it is a great feature, a great option. Now, why is it a great option, Jerry? Well, first of all, any regulated industry is going to have standards that you must comply with. And so you've got to comply with it. Well, how do you validate that you comply? Well, you get independently audited. So now there's two roles here. One is internal to the business. Like let's take a hospital, right? Hospital's got to comply with HIPAA in the United States, right? HIPAA has a whole bunch of things, but there's a subset of security controls and a subset of privacy control, right? So you need people in the organization to know what those are and help educate the business on what needs to be done in order to be compliant with that standard. And by the way, in reality, we don't just go from like not compliant to fully compliant, right? Like it's usually much more of a gradation over a period of time where you're like, well, we've got, 80% of the controls in place and the other 20% are kind of like there, but they're a mess. And you never pass an audit without like a bunch of dings and dents on the report. And it's basically like fix that and next time we come in. But the people who work there need to get you compliant, and then an independent audit team needs to come in and audit you and then write reports. And then, that happens with some level of regularity, like, annually, sometimes with like FSMA. It used to be every 3 years. I think FSMA's now bumped it up to annually for certain systems and stuff like that. But the point is, there's a ton of work in this space. With the upcoming 800-171 or CMMC, depending on how you call it, the U.S. government is actually going to be requiring any business doing business with the U.S. government, so like basically bidding on federal contracts and winning them and getting paid from the government for doing work, they will be required to comply with NIST Special Publication 800-171. It's about 25 controls. It doesn't matter. What you need to know is that in order to bid on the contract, they need to validate that they are compliant. Well, how are businesses are already flipping out about this? How do we get compliant? We don't understand what 171 is. Well, don't worry. You can hire someone like me or like some of you to get you to where you need to be. Here's a roadmap on getting compliant, right? And all the things that go with that. On the converse of that, how's the U.S. government going to know that you're compliant? Like the U.S. government outsources tons and tons and tons of work, right? Like the U.S. government's not going to have like a department of CMMC audit, right? They're just going to create a contract and bill it out. So that's a ton of work. Audit and compliance, in my opinion, across all the dimensions of GRC work and really all the dimensions of information security work is very forgiving if you're not super technical, right? You will get more technical as you work in information security. But if you're working in marketing, finance, accounting, construction, right? You work construction, you're a Starbucks barista, whatever. You don't work with tech. Audit and compliance is really much more forgiving, because when you are auditing, you're like, okay, all right, so like the audit standard says you have to have at least 8 character passwords. System administrator, can you show me that? Here's a screenshot. Boom. Okay. It says you're supposed to have multi-factor authentication. Now, I'm not a technical person, so I don't know what multi-factor authentication means, but it doesn't matter, because all I have to say is, hey, it says you have to have it. How are you guys doing that? Sysadmin. Oh, well, we use Duo, for this, and this. Okay, that's fine. So you write it down. And it's not going to be perfect. You have opportunities for engineers to blow smoke up your butt and kind of, trick you or lie to you, basically, which is a different set of problems when you're auditing someone. Or they could say MFA, and we're using, I've seen this before, and it's silly, but multi-factor. Yeah, don't worry. They have a username and a password. There's 2 factors, right? Which everybody on this call knows that is not multi-factor authentication. But if you didn't know, maybe you're like, okay, that's fine. So it's not going to be perfect, but audit is very forgiving in that capacity. And then the final thing I'll say about that, because I just said all this work, huge firms like Booz Allen Hamilton, Deloitte, PwC, SAIC, Accenture, right? The list goes on. And I'm sure there's a list somewhere that you can Google of all like the DC Beltway professional consulting firms that are huge. They win the work, and then they turn around and they hire, or they'll hire beforehand, people to do this work. Now, here is a truth that you guys need to know. Just the business of this is why it's awesome for us. Booz Allen Hamilton wins an award. Let's say that the federal government's going to put out a contract for CMMC auditing, right? Okay. They're going to bill it as, or like Booz Allen would bid on it, right? Everybody bids on it, but you have to put a price structure in there. Like what's your price going to be for this contract if you win it? Okay. And they'll say, okay, we're going to need, I'm making these numbers up, but you'll get the idea. All right. We're going to need 1 senior analyst, me, and 3 junior analysts, right? Let's say Kevin, Timmy, Tom. And Jerry costs $500. Jerry, Timmy, Tom costs $300 an hour, and Booz Allen wins it. Okay. You can only charge for that $300 an hour if you have a body sitting in the seat executing the work that you agreed to. Now, Booz isn't going to pay you $300 an hour, obviously, but your loaded rate, which means like your healthcare, your 401k, your actual cash compensation, all that stuff, let's say it comes out to like $150 an hour. Booz Allen is highly motivated to get someone in that seat and start billing, because it's pure profit, that extra $150, that delta. And then obviously if they can get someone a bit more junior, someone a bit more green, they have processes and procedures to get you up to speed, but they're going to be, say that your loaded rate, if you're a bit green or a junior or something like that, is $75 an hour, fully loaded. Okay, so now they're making $225 an hour on you, right? So they're more inclined and incentivized to help people launch careers than they are to get, someone like me who's, a little bit more experienced and would definitely charge a lot more. So that is all a long way to spend a lot of time on audit and compliance. I will tell you personally, I did some other stuff, but for the most part, my career really started taking off with FISMA auditing. I was doing, it was called DIACAP at the time, but it turned into FISMA, working for the Marine Corps, doing audit. And it was good work. And you get super exposed to all the controls, all the language, all the terminology, and then you're off and running. I'll just pause for a second because I can't tell if there's questions or anything. Does anyone have any questions before I go on to risk? Okay. Thank you.
You guys can unmute yourselves and ask any questions.
Yeah, I see there's a chat, but I don't want to click it. I can do it. I see this. Okay. Last call for questions before I dig in.
I have a question.
Go. All right, go.
For ITAR compliance, is there a longer intro to get into ITAR versus any of the other types of compliance like HIPAA and all that?
Yeah,
longer path?
I don't know a ton about ITAR. I know ITAR typically, I think the CMMC stuff is going to play into that ITAR because it's basically around federal government, specifically like DOD, and the security of the data that's being kind of exchanged. I'm not an expert on ITAR, I'll tell you that. But I think part of this whole CMMC thing is to ensure a minimum level of security control of any vendor that's interfacing with the U.S. government. That's kind of a half answer. I wish I could give you a better one.
No, that's okay. That still helps. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's move on to risk. Now, the reason I chose risk second, and I'd be happy to have a healthy debate with anyone about this. I think risk is more of a mid-tier and up function, right? So you're not going to get, maybe you could get an entry-level risk analyst job, but if you did, chances are you'd be working directly with someone who's senior and they would be delegating work down to you. Hey, go, Eric gets the job as the junior risk analyst. It would much more be like, hey, Eric, go write up a report on like the top threat or top 3 threats to our industry of manufacturing. And then I would use that as an input into my overall risk assessment. And there's a whole methodology around risk assessment and stuff like that. But the reason I do it second and say it's a little bit more mid-tier is because when you do an audit, right, you're basically saying, here's a control, right? Got to have multi-factor authentication. Do you have it? Yes or no, or partially. Yes, no, impartially. And then you check it off and you go down to the next. And then you basically have kind of a chart of like, these are the controls in place. These are the controls not in place. Here's your overall kind of adjudication. Well, risk is the next step, right? So let's say that you don't have change control, you don't have backups, and you do have multi-factor, right? I'm making this up as I go, but just follow me. I think it'll make sense, right? So you do the audit and you find out, yes, all these things are in place, but they're lacking backups or they didn't test the backups. Let's go with that. You have backups, way to go. You didn't, I'll talk about measuring risk in a second too. You take the backups, you don't practice restoring the backups, you don't do tabletop exercises, etc. A risk analyst takes that information and then goes one step further and says, okay, well, you don't have backups. Is that a problem? Right? Or you don't restore your backups. Is that a problem? Well, you do a threat assessment on your industry, on your business, right? How big your company is, what vertical it operates in, revenue, all this stuff. And you say, okay, well, ransomware is rampant, right? Like the chances of ransomware happening are pretty high. This isn't good. You don't restore your backup. You've never restored your backups, so we have no confidence that those backups are going to work. The business says that they can only stand to be down like 3 or 4 days, right? You might not always get that from the business because they have a tough time explaining in terms that are usable what the impact would actually be to them. But let's just say that they can't really stand being down for too many days. Well, as a risk analyst, you would use, and you can use NIST Special Pub 830. This is a subjective qualified analysis technique, but you would use likelihood of the event occurring, and you can use whatever scale you want, 0 to 5, 0 to 100, whatever. Likelihood of the event happening against impact of the event being realized. And what's this look like? What are the chances of ransomware hitting us? Are they good? Are they bad? Is it really unlikely? Is it almost guaranteed? This is the likelihood, right? And it's a gradient scale that goes up from never going to happen to it's definitely going to happen, and we better be prepared. The impact is, it's not really a big deal, right? Like a crypto jacking coin miner Chrome extension on one of my end users. Like it's annoying, but it's not like we're not stopping business. I'm not like nuking from orbit that guy's laptop. It's just annoying. In fact, sometimes I don't even do anything about it because I just don't have time for it and I don't care. So that's not a big deal. Ransomwaring our domain controller, that's a big problem. Business is down, okay? So you do that calculation and then you say, like, essentially, this would be a high risk, right? We have backups, but we don't test them. We have no efficacy of whether or not we can recover. We don't know how long it would take. This is a huge problem. Then you can say, and this is whether or not you want to take it to the next level and be like a superstar risk analyst, but you would say, okay, listen, this is a huge problem. Here are a couple different options. And I alluded to this earlier. Like we can do a tabletop event. We can actually do a weekend where we restore to our DR environment and run the business for a weekend, or run the business for 5 days in the DR environment. And guys, this is where you've got to get the business to buy in, because what I just suggested is incredibly disruptive. People in business, this thing right here is printing money. We don't mess with the thing printing money. And what you're suggesting is, well, let's just like shut it down and see if the other backup money printing machine works, right? The business doesn't typically like that. And this is where it gets more into like the nuances of political capital and you know, relationships and stuff like that, which is beyond the scope of this talk. But this is what a risk analyst does. And I love the risk work. It's very, it's a mix of like art and science, really, which is really why I like it. I will just shout out really quick. There is a methodology called FAIR, F-A-I-R, that is, it's got its own like cult following, and I wish I knew more about it, but it's a quantified, probabilistic methodology of assessing risk. And it's really, really useful because you can give more concrete information to the business on when you're saying that this is a big problem, like how big a problem is it? With the subjective method that I gave you, it's like, oh, it's a high likelihood and it's a critical risk, but that's not like how much money are we talking, or is it like 100% chance or a 90% chance? Because one's guaranteed and one is 1 in 10. So that methodology is worth mentioning. Oh, thank you, Sandra. Hopefully we're recording this and you can get some of that. So this is the risk, and I'll go a little bit deeper on risk if y'all want. But as I said, I went audit. Then I turned over to risk and started doing risk analysis, running my own risk program, enterprise risk assessments. So for a day in the life, a risk analyst will do a couple things. I told you kind of the methodology of doing risk analysis, but how do you apply it at work? Here's like really the two kind of, or three scenarios. One, hey, we want to go in this direction, whether it's we want to move from on-prem up to Office 365. Maybe it's we want to open into the European market. We're considering acquiring this business and integrating it with our business. Like whatever this is why you interface with the business. The business comes to you, or you're one of the key stakeholders, and they say, listen, we want to do this. What do you think? And they don't care what your opinion is on whether you think it's a good idea or not, from like, oh, I don't like the brand colors or PR stuff. They care, is there material cyber risk here that we need to be concerned about? Because it can affect the price that you're going to pay in that acquisition. It can decide whether or not you're not even going to go into that market. To use the European one for an example, like privacy kind of dabbles in InfoSec. It's not completely removed, but usually it's its own function. But like to be GDPR compliant is very expensive, right? If you want to do it right. And GDPR will backhand you hardcore with a financial penalty if you mess around with it. So that might be part of the risk calculation when you're deciding whether or not to move into the European market. That's one way. Another way is like an actual threat, right? Like CEO like sees Colonial Pipeline on the news and comes to you, or he or she would probably go to the CISO and say, are we secure from ransomware? Like, that's the question. Well, it's not really the right question to ask, but that's fine. The CISO would turn around to the risk team or to the risk analyst or to you and say, hey, I need a risk assessment done on the threat of ransomware to our organization. And that basically just means if ransomware detonates in our org, how bad is it? Like, explain to me how bad is it and why, right? You've always got to be able to have a paper trail behind your analysis and your audit, by the way, to explain how you came to the conclusions you came to. Because if you're just winging it and kind of like shooting from the hip, if anyone calls you on it, you're gonna be exposed. And the second you do that, you've compromised your entire work product. The whole thing becomes sus. So just be mindful of that, guys. Okay, so that's all. And then the third item for risk, and this one is this one's really popular right now, but it's annoying. Is and it's not even really like risk, but like if you're going to partner with some group, like, oh, we're gonna partner with this group or whatever. They may provide you a security questionnaire. Tell us how you're doing security, right? Typically, the risk analyst will be required to fill that out, and it's basically like, what controls do you have in place? And yes or no. You'll also get it like when you're trying to get cyber security, ransomware insurance, or just cyber insurance, period. The insurance companies have lost their shirt over the last, 2 years, mostly from ransomware, business email compromise. So now they like really want to know what you're doing. And I'll tell you, I worked at a company not too long ago, and based on the current security posture, by the way, it's why they hired me, but I'd only been there a few weeks, so I hadn't really had time to build the program yet. But based on the current security posture that they had at the time, 28 insurance companies were engaged to ask for a quote. 24 of them, well, all 20 of them asked in different ways, like, what's your security situation? 24 of them said, we're not going to give you a quote. Like, we're just not going to we're not going to work with you. Like, that's not going to happen. And the other 4, it affected the premium and stuff, but this is work of a risk analyst, right? So if any of that sounds really cool to you, that could be your jam. Moving on. The policy one, this one I won't spend a ton of time on. Policy is basically like in my house, we have rules. Kids go to bed at 8. We eat dinner as a family. These are rules. Like, come home when the street lights come on. These are rules. Policy is basically just rules for business. That's all it is. They call it something different, but it's basically the rules. What are we doing here? Policy is wicked important because in the absence of policy, and let me preface this for a second. Not everybody, but most people, I would say a high percentage of people, like 99% of people at work, want to do the right thing, right? They're not looking to be nefarious. They're not looking to stick it to the man. Like, they just want to do the right thing. And the right thing has to align with like them getting their job done, because they're most concerned with getting their job done. And when they have to make a decision, they will make what they think is a good decision based on the knowledge they have. In the absence of policy, you're not defining what that information is. And how does this manifest into something that's like a real problem? Okay, so we don't have policy at this fictitious Raices cyber company on remote access, right? So Kevin, he's wicked smart, sysadmin, IT guy. He knows what's up. So he doesn't need to come in on the weekends to like reboot network switches or to make sure that the patch is applied over the weekend, right? So Kevin installs TeamViewer on his work machine so he can access it from the Outer Banks when he goes away this weekend. No big deal. Now, Kevin's thinking, this is cool. Like, who cares? Like, I know how to secure TeamViewer. No big deal. Well, again, good intention, but here's the thing. TeamViewer comes out with a 0-day vuln. I'm responsible for the cybersecurity of my company. I have no idea about this piece of shadow IT over here. Kevin's thinking, my job is to do this. He's not even reading the briefings on, and by the way, come to the morning daily briefings. This is why you would do it. You'd find out about the 0-day. He doesn't know about that, so he's running exposed. He would patch if he knew it, but he doesn't know it, and I don't know it, so I can't ask him to patch. This is a problem. And then we get TeamViewer over here. Eric installs Log Me In. Chris Hidalgo found some like weird open source GitHub remote access solution that's perfect for him. It works on his Android phone. No big deal. Now we've got this rampant sprawl of remote access. And guys, that's an attack surface that sucks to have, all over the place, right? Kevin's Log Me In, or Kevin's TeamViewer doesn't have multi-factor authentication. When we did the audit earlier, do you use multi-factor? Oh, yeah, we got multi-factor on Office 365. Yeah, that's fine, but it's like a hospital gown with your butt hanging out the back. Like, you are exposed. So what does policy do? A lot of people roll their eyes and be like, oh, policy, documents, bleh. Right? Here's the thing. Good policy that's informed by the business, supported by management, which is wicked critical, and simple enough for the organization to understand, has teeth. So we write, remote access is prohibited unless by exception. All end users are required to connect to the network via VPN, and then you can use like this approved solution for remoting in, like Secure Shell. Or listen, I will lose my mind if there is a Microsoft RDP exposed to the internet breach. I lose my mind. I don't mind it if you're on the VPN and you're remoting to someone's machine to help them. That's like what remote desktop is supposed to be, for remote administration, not for internet administration. VPN and then do it, okay? So that's the policy. So now I find Kevin's team viewer, because I'm running telemetry in my environment and I see it like pinging back to TeamViewer's IP space. I can go to Kevin and be like, Kevin, what are we doing here, man? And he's like, oh, I use TeamViewer to log in because, CEO needs me to do X, Y, and Z. I'm like, all right, well, policy says you can't do that. We're not doing that here. Oh, by the way, you can't be like, no, end of story. You have to say, again, because of the business, you have to say, no, here is a solution that solves your problem. I know it's not what you want, but logistically, you can get to the CEO's computer, log on to the VPN, then remote into his box. It's an extra step. I don't care. My job is to protect this organization. Your job is to make sure the CEO's computer stays up and running. This is how you can do it, right? That's the power of policy. So policy work is important. You have to do it to align with requirements. You have to do it to facilitate the business. And that's about all I'll say to that. But policy is really important. It just often gets dashed to the side as a pencil whipping exercise for compliance purposes. Real policy has real value, especially when you're dealing with like shadow IT or oftentimes, and I mean this with the greatest respect, IT staff who think that they've got this. Like, I've been working in IT for 20 years. I'm not the risk, okay? I had a senior IT admin detonate ransomware in my environment last year. So it happens, and it's annoying. So with all the respect to my heart, policy applies to everyone. Make sure you provide them solutions. This is the important part of policy work. Moving on to security awareness. You won't find a bigger advocate of the value and the approach of security awareness than me. I actually think I don't know, it's probably hubris of me to even say this, but like, I feel like I've pushed a new paradigm of security awareness. So traditionally, security awareness has been like, here's a PowerPoint presentation once a year, make sure you read it, you're compliant, right? Like, it's like the laziest of ways to comply with security awareness. Here's the problem. One, you're typically getting that once a year. If you get it, you're getting that once a year. The same time you're getting like HR policy and acceptable use policy and PTO policy and holiday schedule and like, safe workplace stuff. It's a ton. So security awareness turns into like, oh my God, just another one of these, click, 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 right? No, the right way, and let me preface this for a second. What is the point of security awareness? The point of security awareness is to modify end users' behavior to a better cyber hygiene position. That's all it is. It sounds manipulative, but again, in the absence of information, people will try to make the best decision on the information they have. If you educate them, they will make educated decisions, more cyber hygiene friendly decisions. Okay, now how do you do this? If you're doing security awareness, a day in the life is very much thinking like you need to communicate often and simply to your audience. So you may like don't give them like, here's 10 things you need to know about. You need to like pick one and like once a week deliver that one thing. You have to make it relevant. This is probably the most important thing of this entire talk that I can say to you. The most effective way to educate an end user in security is to apply whatever the lesson is that you're trying to teach them to them personally. They will bring that behavior into the workplace, but they will listen to you if you personalize it. They will not listen to you, or a less chance of success if they listen to you if you don't personalize it. So what does this mean, Jerry? Okay, listen, we're going to be rolling MFA out enterprise-wide. Super disruptive. I don't know if anyone here has ever rolled out MFA. It's a pain in the butt, okay? It's easy to enroll yourself. It's way harder when you have, 2,000 end users. Some don't have mobile phones. Some think you're trying to install spy tracking software on their mobile device. Some people aren't tech savvy enough to figure out how to do it. Some people lose their devices, etc. There's a whole host of things with it, right? Some people just push back. This is ridiculous, okay? So, send out messaging way before that. Hey, what's up? This is Jerry from InfoSec. wanted to tell you guys how you can protect yourself from getting robbed by cyber criminals, right? Multi-factor authentication on your financial accounts, right? Your bank and credit cards definitely supports multi-factor authentication. If you do multi-factor authentication, when a bad guy gets your password, which they can easily get or guess, they won't be able to get into your account and steal your money. Ask your bank or whatever about how to install multi-factor, or, basically I'm saying this off the fly, but do you see how, I'm helping you, Eric, prevent being robbed? That matters to Eric. Eric doesn't want his money to disappear or someone to steal it. Okay. So now Eric gets into MFA, or asks somebody, right? Well, now he's got MFA. So when I introduce it as a concept, it's already familiar. The workflows are already familiar. The enrollment process is familiar. Going username, password, and then going to your phone to get that 6-digit PIN is familiar. You have a greater chance of smoother operation, higher adoption, obviously more secure, right? And you can do this all the time. And it's not always about an initiative, right? I'll give you a great example. Do you guys remember the Super Bowl and the Coinbase QR code? The internet was on fire for 2 days about this simple but wicked effective commercial that they did. Okay, so Super Bowl's on Sunday. On Monday, I sent out an email to my end users about QR codes. Hey, did everybody see that crazy QR code commercial from the Super Bowl? Pretty wild, right? QR codes are basically URLs that allow you to go to a website. The problem is I've told you about in phishing information to look at the URL to make sure it's safe. Well, with the QR code, you can't look at it. So be mindful when you're scanning a QR code. It could be sending you to a malicious website, right? Or it could be stealing your credentials, whatever. Very simple, very effective, very timely and topical. People will read those emails. People will digest it mentally. You have to make it snackable, okay? If you give a long... Guys, think about the last time you got a long, word block digest email from somebody that wasn't your boss. You probably opened it and then went, nope, and closed it, right? So don't fall into that trap, right? We got a lot of great stuff to say, but make it snackable, make it personal, and then when you roll out or drop something, when you roll something out, people will be more inclined to do it. They're obviously going to practice better cyber hygiene in their day-to-day operations. And thirdly, personally, I do video messages to my audience or my end users, but you will have a face or a name to the information security office. So you're personalizing the information security office to the business. So then when Carl or this senior IT admin detonates ransomware, I mean, he was going to have to tell me anyways, because I was going to find out from my EDR, but he calls me immediately. He's like, hey, this mistake happened. This is a problem. Or I had a woman who was actually on extended bereavement leave have her account get hacked, and she called me and was like, hey, sorry to bother you, Jerry, but I'm seeing some weird stuff on my phone. Can you look at it or whatever? That woman would never have called me if she didn't know who I was, right? Maybe she would have opened a help desk ticket. I don't know. But personalizing it, making you not just personalize it, but adding humanity to the information security office goes a long way. Security awareness is wicked important. Here's another thing about security awareness that you should be aware of, okay? To me, it is one of the 3 most high value controls that you can have to protect your environment. You can't see everything. Tooling isn't configured well all the time. You have gaps, shadow IT, all these other things. There's a million reasons why an InfoSec office fails. But if you have all of the people in your organization, the ones who are likely going to be targeted by threat actors, mindful, they will tell you, they will notice things. They'll be more engaged on these things. And it just goes a long way, right? It's huge value. Okay. The final thing here, I put business engagement. I guess I've already kind of talked about this with third-party risk management and internal stakeholders. When you work in the GRC office, you will become a member, again, because you're the business interface for the information security office. You will have multiple opportunities, whether you like it or not, to be put on committees, to be brought into projects, right? There's usually like someone from, depending on how big a organization you work at, there'll be like someone from IT, or it depends how big you are, but maybe you have someone from the application team, someone from networking, from some systems, someone from HR, someone from legal, someone from information security, like someone from the business operations side of things, right? Like you'll have a tiger team of key stakeholders, and InfoSec needs to be represented, because if they're not represented, typically no one thinks about it, or the IT people speak for information security, which again, all the respect in the world to the IT people, but they're IT professionals, not exactly or fully fleshed out information security professionals. So there can be gaps there. There are many great IT people who understand InfoSec in a deep level. So I'm not smearing IT people, just to be crystal clear here. But you will be on these committees and you'll do this type of work. And this is kind of where you represent, like you're an internal stakeholder on initiatives and stuff like that. And then you'll start bringing in like your risk ideas, or you'll bring back to the information security office. If you're a more junior analyst, you might bring something back to the InfoSec office and say, hey, these things are going on. How does this impact us? Et cetera, et cetera. So, whew. All right. So that, I mean, I won't spend... if you want the other function in the GRC capability that I didn't talk about, that day in the life would be a CISO, right? CISO is in GRC. A day in the life of them, it depends on organization size, but typically you're dealing with other business leaders. So a CISO basically manages sideways to their peers and then manages down of their information security office. And if they're particularly aggressive, they'll manage up into the CEO and the board. CISOs typically are they're working on like long-term strategy plans, right? So like 3-year roadmap, high level, like what's our current state of information security program? How are we getting towards that? CISO has a lot to do with like money, like budgets, like you've got staff who got salaries, you have HR, not issues, but you've got to meet with your staff if you want to be an engaged leader. Make sure that they're happy, make sure that they're feeling challenged and engaged. Like it becomes a lot, unfortunately, it becomes a lot that's not information security, which is part of the reason, like when you get to CISO, you're like, oh crap, like what did I do? So anyways, I could go deeper if you guys wanted more of a day in the life of CISO, but that's the day in the life for the different capabilities within the GRC space. I'll open it up to chat here. Laptop stickers.
Gerald,
no. Let it fly, man. You can still rock those.
Can you talk about TPRM?
Mm-hmm. So TPRM is third-party risk management. Typically, you'll see this at larger organizations because they have a little bit more strength, I guess, or muscle to be able to actually impose their requirements, right? If you're like a 3-person startup, you can't tell a partner organization that they're going to enable multi-factor authentication. But if you're Amazon and you're trying to do work with Amazon, and Amazon's like, you can't work with us unless you implement multi-factor authentication, they will. Third-party risk management is, businesses can do a lot internally, but they do a lot with external stakeholders to provide additional functionality, additional services, capabilities, right? A perfect example is any SaaS provider, right? Any cloud solution provider is typically built on top of Amazon, AWS, or Azure, or Google, or any of the other ones. But basically, they don't control that infrastructure underneath, but they depend on it for their business, right? So this is third-party risk. Typically, within the GRC space, you will evaluate your partners before you agree to contractual terms with them, and you'll actually stipulate in the contract what kind of things are expected of them and what kind of services or assurances you'll be granted. So, for example, you might demand that you can audit them at least once a year, or a common one that you'll see is if they suffer a cyber incident, like a confirmed breach, that they need to notify you within X amount of time, or that they will sever the network connection. Because a lot of times they'll be like, oh my God, I can't believe I can't think of the term right now, like a peer-to-peer network connection, like a VPN, connection. Like your networks will be mounted together. That's fairly common, and you'll sever that connection. Or they'll sever it on their end proactively to prevent, lateral movement into your orgs, stuff like that. This is how you manage this risk. Now, I will say third-party risk management is wonderful in theory, but when you see it in practice, it can be less effective. Here's the reason why. Again, you want to, like, we're like a 20-person business, and we're going to win this big contract with Amazon. Like, we're super excited. It's going to fund us for 2 years. We're all high-fiving each other, right? And we have certain requirements that we expect of our partners, right? And Amazon's not doing any of them, say, right? Well, normally I'd be like, listen, this is not good. Like, they are not secure. This is introducing a lot of risk to our organization. And the business, and this is where the business might say, that's fine, we're willing to accept the risk. And this is actually a key point that is really crystallized with third-party risk management. You might hear sometimes when there's a breach at an organization, is it the CISO's fault? Whose fault is it? Who takes the axe, right? Well, my argument is it's not the CISO's, and it's not because I don't want to protect myself. It's because my job as CISO, yes, it's to build a program that helps protect the organization, but my job is to inform and advise. I am a subject matter expert advising the business on behalf of their cybersecurity needs on what they should do. So when I say that, hey, this third party is a hot mess express, and they say, but they're going to give us $2 million, we're totally going to do it. I say, all right, well, that's fine. You've been advised, you've been warned, and maybe I try to come up with like some compensating controls, maybe come up with some way to reduce the risk in some capacity, right? Maybe we put like extra monitoring on that network connection, or we make them come through a jump box before they get into our network, or something like that. Like you introduce controls within the space that you're able to control to make up and reduce the risk that third party would be introducing. And this also usually initializes with those questionnaires that I told you about, like that everybody's filling out, and then you have to, like, it gives you this baseline information on what the heck is going on with this, so you can then make your risk analysis and informed security controls that you would expect and stuff like that. I'll just really quick too, another caution with third-party risk that you have to be mindful of is a lot of times third parties will get credentials in your Active Directory. So like they have creds just the same as you, but maybe they're like remote workers, or it was just for like a project or something, but that access will persist. That's always a problem. It's always annoying. So you typically would stipulate, hey, you have to let us know if staff leaves, if the project ends, all these other things. But the reality is that information never really seems to convey or get down to the identity and access management team to disable those accounts and stuff like that. That's a very specific thing, but annoys me because I see it all the time. Is that
Jerry,
good for you?
We have another question here. What are POAMs, and why do you use them, and how you create them?
Sure. So a POAM is a plan of action and milestones, and essentially what it is it's a spreadsheet that has a list of like open problems, right? Like, remember earlier I said you're not doing backup, you're not practicing restoring backups. You've never tested your backups. You just take them and you hope one day that they'll work. So a POAM is basically just a list, and you might have risk, backups not tested, right? And then on the POAM you would say like when are you going to fix this, right? Like a date. Who's responsible for fixing this? And then what's the last like activity done? Because a lot of times the POAM item, it might require funding, right? It might require resources or time. Remember I said in order to test the backups, you'd actually have to like bring down production and restore production, maybe at an alt site. Well, that takes time and money, so you can't just like flip a switch and do it. So in the POAM provides you that visibility into like, here's how we're going to fix this. And there's also like a status, right? So maybe it was closed, so you have like a historical record of where your risks were. You can also use a POAM to help show, like, remember earlier I told you like some independent auditor comes in and they're like, okay, we're testing you for this standard and you failed 20% of the standard. That's not good. Well, you could say like, yeah, but check out the POAM. We knew about that. We actually have a plan of actions in place to address that issue. You could see it's actually funded for Q3 this year. We're going to allocate the resources. We're good to go. And an auditor will actually take that and be like, okay, they're not going to say that you have it in place, but they're less likely to mark it as a material finding, which is what you want. You don't want material findings. That's the worst when it comes to audits. So POAM, tricky word or clever acronym. It's definitely government, but it's basically just a spreadsheet with a list of open problems and what you're going to do about them. You typically only see it like in the federal space or that's the only times I've seen it. Financial services might use it, but a POAM is only good if you're actually actively maintaining it and using it as kind of a register to refer to what the current health state of risk reduction is for your organization.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm asking if anybody has any additional questions. So let me stop the sharing here. Okay. So does anybody else has any additional questions? Go ahead and unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Yeah, these POAMs, also known in the civilian world as risk registers. So you might hear that word as well in the civilian market. So again, Gerald, thank you very much for taking time on a Saturday to go brief our members here on GRC. I'm sure that there was a lot of people that learned a lot of things from you. And I just want to let everybody know, Gerald has on his YouTube channel a whole series of videos about GRC and learning about GRC. So go see
I'll
his
drop it in
stuff.
the chat right now.
Yep, there it is.
Well, that's a link to the to the streams for the morning briefings, because I really, it's so, those morning briefings are so awesome. Yeah. Like I have a wonderful time with them, but the community feedback that I'm hearing is that it's really well received. So I try to tell everybody about it.
Well, everybody should be joining. If you're on LinkedIn, you're following him, you get an alert on LinkedIn when he goes live. So it's great for daily stuff and learning a lot of stuff there. So again, thank you very much, Gerald. And thank you very much to all the members that joined this. And we'll see you guys next week for another one of these talks on our Summer of Cybersecurity Education. With that, I'm going to shut down the stream, and thank you very much, everybody, for attending.